Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.
Thank you so much for joining us on Straight Talk. How are you? You got put out of elementary school because you were pretty bad.
Straight Talk, politics,
Equal employment opportunity commission.
race.
She's a dark-skinned girl.
Straight Talk, money matters, international news.
Let's talk about colonialism.
Straight Talk, celebrity interviews, sports. Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Lloyd Geit. On today's show, the author of a brand new book called My First Coup d'etat. His name is John Mahama. He is also the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, which is in West Africa. I'd like to thank you for joining us on today's show. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
First of all, I want to back up a little bit. Let's talk about colonialism and its effect on West Africa, primarily Ghana, since that's what we're talking about. Let's talk about that. I think it was 1845 when the British came to Ghana.
We count the period of colonial rule in Ghana from about 1844. There was a bond that was signed between the coastal chiefs and the British government. And so that is about when we begin to talk about colonialism. It started gradually from the south. A protectorate was formed, and eventually it was turned into a colony. And then a protectorate was formed in Ashanti. Eventually Ashanti was colonized. A protectorate was formed in what we call the Northern Territories, where I come from. And eventually that was added to the colony. But I'll say that colonialism started from the Berlin Conference, when the scramble for Africa started. And various European powers, went into Africa and just, carved up Africa amongst
Any
themselves.
way they wanted to.
Yes, that's right. And so we have French-speaking countries, we have English-speaking countries, we have Portuguese-speaking countries, we have Spanish, speaking countries. Yeah, and Ghana particularly is surrounded by French-speaking countries. And so to our east, west, north, we have French-speaking countries, except the Atlantic Ocean speaks no language.
Let's fast forward a little bit to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of an independent Ghana. Now, your father was also involved with him. Let's talk about democracy coming to Ghana after all of these years of colonialism and the importance of democracy.
Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was a very special person. He studied in America, and he had his first degree at the Lincoln University, and he did a postgraduate in Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania. Now, he was in America at a time when the civil rights movement had begun, and he got involved, with issues to do with the civil rights. Apart from that, there was a new Pan-African movement that had started, of which Nkrumah became a very active member. And so when he finished his studies in America, he took this new found, sense of independence, back home. And there had been a struggle that had started, but it was mostly by conservative lawyers, who, even though were advocating for independence, were not in the position where they could push strongly for it. And so Nkrumah was made the General Secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention, the UGCC. And the UGCC, galvanized the people to fight, for independence. There's a very important, dimension that added to the struggle. Ex-servicemen had come back from fighting in Asia, and the British government had failed to pay them the pensions they thought they deserved. And so the ex-servicemen went on a demonstration to the castle, which was the seat of government, and a British officer ordered that fire be opened on them. 3 of them were killed, and that sparked general riots in Accra. That could be said to have been the spark that actually, eventually ended colonialism in Ghana.
Well, Kwame Nkrumah became president. People were very optimistic, not only in Ghana, but throughout that whole western coast of Africa, because the same kinds of things were happening there. But then there was a coup d'etat, and that was your first coup d'etat. I think you were 7 years old.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because your father was involved with Kwame Nkrumah's government. Your first coup d'etat, what happened?
The coup d'etat happened in February 1966, and we were in school for the Easter term. I describe it in the book. I mean, there were talk about coup d'etat, and you could see everybody was agitated, you know, on the...
But you were 7 years old, right?
I was 7 years old, you know, but I remember the dates. Like, there are certain significant days that you remember what you were doing and where you were. So even though I was 7 years old, I can remember, you know, teachers walking around and, you know, huddling together and, you know, speaking in muted tones and all that.
You
know.
knew something was going on.
I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what it was and what the effect was going to be on me. Eventually, we heard there'd been a coup d'etat. What was a coup d'etat? I mean, it said the government had been overthrown. I mean, overthrown. But I think its impact dawned on me when the school vacated. And often my dad would come and pick me, or he would send a driver to pick me up, or a relation to pick me up. Nobody came.
Nobody?
And,
you were left there by yourself?
The boarding school kept emptying. Children kept leaving, their parents coming for them, and I was left there all by myself.
Your auntie, or one of the headmistresses, attempted to take you home, is that correct?
Yeah. And our house had been occupied by soldiers. And they said my family lived there no more. And so the auntie brought me back to school. And they tried to contact my family. They couldn't tell where my family had moved to. It was after a while that I remembered that, you know, my sister Rose lived in the military barracks.
Right, right. She was married to a soldier, right?
Married to a soldier, yes. And so when I mentioned it, they called the military barracks and they were connected to the house. Happily, she was an air hostess. Happily, she hadn't traveled. She was in town. And so when they called, she came and picked me up.
Now, your father was put in detention for a little over a year, is that correct?
That's true.
What happened to him?
All the ministers of state and top government officials were asked to report to the nearest police station for their own safety.
For their own safety,
Own safety.
right? But we knew what that meant. That didn't quite mean their own safety.
He took it at face value, and he reported for his own safety, and that ended him up in detention for over a year. It was a very traumatic experience for him. And that particular incident changed the rest of the course of our lives. Because after that incident, he decided, one, not to get involved in politics again, and he decided to move his family back to the north, where we come from. And so he moved all of us back to the north, and that's how come I attended secondary school in the north. I did my primary school in the south and did my secondary school in the north, and only came back to the south for university.
We're going to talk more about that, but we're going to take a break. Do not go away. We will be back with more of Straight Talk and the author of this wonderful book, My First Coup d'Etat. Stay with us.
Straight Talk.
Did you know that getting up and getting active for just 60 minutes a day is all it takes to help you get stronger, look better, and feel great?
Or that fresh fruits and veggies aren't just healthier and crunchier, they can taste better too?
Eating better and getting more active is easier than you think.
Yeah! Keep watching for some fun and easy ways to discover the magic of healthy living in your life.
America.
Let's get healthy together!
Today is Saturday.
60 minutes of physical activity a day and eating well can help get your child healthy. Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov. That's letsmove.gov.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. My guest is the author of this new book called My First Coup d'Etat. His name is John Mahama. He actually is the current vice president of the Republic of Ghana. Now, this was the first of many coups d'etats that you saw.
Yeah.
7-year-old child goes home, nobody's there. The soldiers have taken over your home. Can't find your father. You find your sister. What happens then?
My father stays in detention for a little over a year. And then eventually he is released. And when he comes out, we almost all don't recognize him. He's got a full beard, you know, and he looked completely different. But what was most important was not his physical appearance. It is what prison had done to him. It was a very traumatic experience for him. And so he decided to go into agribusiness and move the family back north. He had come down because he had to do public service, because he was a member of parliament and a minister of state. Now that, I mean, his office had ended abruptly, there was no reason to continue to stay in Accra, so he moved back up. And he became a very successful businessman. He owned a rice processing mill.
But I want to talk a little bit more about your father, because early on, your father was such a big supporter of education.
Yeah.
I think he had 19 children.
Yes.
And it was his desire to make sure that all of you had a good education.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the importance of that.
Education. One of the main distinctions between the north and the south of our country in terms of development is that education came to the north much later. The British had come up with a policy, and that kept education out of the north because they reserved the north as a pool of labor. They felt that the northerners were physically strong, loyal.
Not necessarily mentally
loyal,
strong.
dedicated, and they needed them to work on the cocoa farms, on the railways, you know, in the gold mines, and in the security services. And they didn't want to introduce education there because they said when education was introduced in the South, it had corrupted the Southerners, and now they were asking for independence. And so the North should be kept free of education. And so a lot of people didn't go to school. Eventually, they changed the policy, and they established the fair school, and they wanted children to attend the school. Most people were reluctant to send their children to school because they believed that the white man was going to take your child away and go and indoctrinate him. Yeah. And so they came up with a policy where they took the children of chiefs, because Britain had what we call indirect rule. They ruled through the chiefs. And so they recognized you as a chief, and then they used you to control your subjects. They practiced it in Nigeria and in all the English colonies in West Africa. And so they passed a law that said that every chief in the north should give one of his children to be put in school. And I described how my father got to be chosen. He had a big navel.
Right.
And the district commissioner squeezed his navel, and he hit out instinctively and knocked his hat off, you know.
And says, there's something to this young man right here. We're going to take him and educate him.
But that's how he got educated. That's how he went to school. And he valued the education he got. And so he made sure that not only us, his children, but all his relatives' children. When he came back, he set up the first school in our hometown called in Bole. And he made sure he took his uncle's children, his sister's children, and put all of them in school. And of course, his own children. He made sure we all got a good education.
I want to talk a little more about the military. The military became so brutal, so violent, and you lived through that. Give me some idea as to what Ghana was like when it started falling down.
Ghana deteriorated, a lot of the euphoria of independence dissipated from about the late 60s into the 70s. The military took over, they controlled every facet of our lives, and the economy started to deteriorate. Indeed, the economy was contracting rather than expanding. So while the population was expanding, the economy was shrinking. And so there was general hardship, across the country. Food was difficult to come by,
fuel and water, all of those things.
Shortage of fuel, shortage of electricity. People had to walk long distances. Poor drinking water and everything. It was a period of hardship for Ghana, but of course that was a period in which we grew. We lived it, because it was the period when we were growing up and coming into consciousness too. And so we made the best of it. The military were in control. There were several coups d'etats. There were a lot of brutalities against the people. And I tried to document it from the eyes of a young person growing up and how I saw it and how I understood it. And I think that it has served as the platform from which we've learned the lessons and experiences that have put Ghana in the current situation in which it is, where Ghana is considered a model of democracy and good governance. I think that it is learning the lessons of what I call the lost decades that has brought us to where we are.
From the 1970s to the 1990s.
1990s.
Pretty much lost. And nobody talks about that, you say.
Very few people talk about it because at the time, a lot of the intellectuals, the writers, the engineers, the professionals,
They left.
They just picked their bags and left. I mean, there was nothing to do anymore in Ghana. And so they didn't live that period. And that's why you find that not too many people document that period. But for those of us who lived in Ghana, I think that we owe it a duty to write about that period so that people understand, where we've come from.
We're going to get back to that, but we're going to take another break. Do not go away. We will be back with more of Straight Talk. Stay with us.
Straight Talk.
Turning a 20-foot wall into a canvas takes vision. So will getting into college. I've got what it takes. So do you.
So, what's it gonna be? We could ride bikes, skating, movies, zoo, whatever you guys want to do.
Can we just do this?
Yeah. We could just do this.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Hey, I'm Demi Lovato. Bullying is never okay. But what are you gonna do? Well, here's an idea. Go to teensagainstbullying.org. The end of bullying begins with you. So join the movement.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. We're talking with the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, which is located in West Africa. He has a new book out that's just really incredible. I want to talk a little bit more about the brain drain. The people who could get out of Ghana, they did. They left. That caused serious problems.
Yeah, it did. Apart from the hardship that we're going through in terms of the economy, a lot of the professionals, engineers, doctors, writers, teachers, I mean, they just had no opportunity, and so most of them just picked their bags and left. Some of them went to other African countries, others migrated to the United States, to Europe, and it created a certain vacuum, at the period. And it's also exacerbated, what was going on in respect of the economic difficulties. The soldiers were in absolute control, and we learned our lessons, and Ghana has become a different place now.
It has become a different place because the people got fed up.
Yeah.
The people got fed up with the misery. They wanted a democratic government. Let's talk about modern day Ghana.
Yeah.
What is it like?
Actually, there's a chapter there called Of Silence and Solidarity. And in that story, I talk about an experience in my boarding school with a bully.
Yes.
Okay, you remember that one?
He was something else.
Yes. And at the same time, I talk about other, dictators, bullies, who had seized power in their various countries. And I try to look at my little experience in my primary school.
Unity among other people.
Extrapolate it with what was
point.
happening in other countries. Yeah, so the people of Africa have stood up. Civil society organizations, traditional rulers, religious leaders, people have spoken up, and Africa has transformed. There's a renaissance taking place in Africa. Between last year and this year, 24 African countries, have gone to elections or are going to elections. Almost all African countries are under constitutional governance. There's a strong sense of respect for rule of law. There might be some human rights abuses. I don't say it's a perfect situation yet, but I think that Africa is moving in the right direction. We have a strong and vibrant media, especially in Ghana. The media is very, very vibrant, and there are no subjects that are bad to them. So we've made quite a lot of progress. But I think that it is based on the experience of where we've come from that is creating a sustainable democracy in Africa.
Do you fear yet another coup d'etat?
No, absolutely not. There's a consensus on all sides of the political divide that we will not go back down that route again.
You were also influenced by what was happening in America.
Yeah.
You were a big fan of James Brown and Michael Jackson.
That's right.
Tell me a little, I think it's fascinating how Ghana, the people in Ghana were influenced by African-American culture here.
I think that the world became a global village long ago, in terms of music and culture. After independence, our first president promoted what he called African personality. And so we like to wear beautiful Joromi dresses with patterns here and all that. But at the same time, we also were imbibing some Western culture in terms of how the Jackson 5 dressed, And so I was born in the same year as Michael Jackson in 1958. And so they had these huge afros. We also had huge afros. We had bell-bottom trousers.
Platform shoes.
We had platform shoes and all that, And most of all, there was an infiltration of Western music into Africa, just as there was, an export of African music into the rest of the world. We had bands like Osibisa from Ghana, that were popular, at that time.
We're going to take yet another break. This is a fascinating discussion. Do not go away. We will be back with Straight Talk after these messages.
Straight Talk.
Hungry?
Yeah.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
All right, guys, we gotta be smarter about what we bite on, okay? I want everyone to go outside. We're gonna run Red Rover on 3.
What about you, Tony?
I'm gonna run around in circles, flap my arms, and make engine noises like this.
When it comes to playing, big kids are the pros.
We're eating right, too. We fuel up to play 60.
Your school doesn't have a program? Be a leader. Start one.
Click today and join the movement. Let's move!
When it's time for lunch, a sandwich is a quick and easy choice. And with the right ingredients, it can be good and good for you. So I'm here today to see who can build the ultimate sandwich. All right, when the time is up, our judges will give you their scores. Ready, set, go! Okay, Jason starts out with a multi-grain roll. Ooh, Allison stuffing her pita with, yes, spinach, a great source of iron. Jason isn't skipping on the protein, adding plenty of smoked turkey, just like Allison's putting the finishing touches with crispy red bell peppers for a dose of vitamin A. Time! It looks like we have a tie. We'll need to call in our special guest referee.
Now, these are what I call quick, delicious lunches. Whole grain breads, a whole variety of ingredients. There are so many different ways to build delicious, healthy sandwiches. These two get high marks in every category. I'd say you're both winners. America.
Let's get healthy together.
Talking to your kids about finishing school isn't easy, just necessary. Go to boostup.org for materials that can help.
In 1977, an 8-year-old boy picked up the game of golf from his father. The odds of that same boy winning the US Open twice, 1 in 1.2 billion. The odds of him having a child diagnosed with autism, 1 in 110. Ernie Els encourages you to learn the signs of autism.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. I want to talk a little bit about your getting to be the vice president of Ghana. You don't talk about that in the book. You went to the School of Communications, you're an expert in history, and you love to write.
Yeah.
But you became the vice president. Tell me a little bit about that.
I don't write about that. This book ends about the middle of the 1980s. I became vice president in 2009. I had been a member of parliament before that. I was a member of parliament for 12 years. I did 3 terms in Ghana's parliament. And then I also served as Minister of Communications of Ghana at a time when we were deregulating the telecom sector. And so over the last 12 years, we've moved from 5% tele density to 17 million Ghanaians having phones out of a population of 24 million. And so that's what the deregulation has done. But I was chosen as the running mate to Professor John Evans Atta Mills in 2008. And we won the election, and we've done our first term. And we're going for re-election in December this year. I always say that every 4 years, there are 2 events that are certain to happen, an American election and a Ghanaian election. And so we are due for re-election too.
You so followed in your father's footsteps. I mean, it's amazing. Did you even think that you would do that?
If you look in the book, on hindsight and talking to him, I realized that he had a certain plan for my life. He always kept me in school separate from my brothers. In primary school, he put me in boarding school, and all my other siblings went to a different school. In secondary school, the same thing. He put me in a different secondary school, and all of them went to another secondary school. He probably could see into the future, and here I am. I dedicated the book to him. He was a great man, and I miss him.
He was quite an incredible man. I mean, just the things that he did. And I also like the relationship that you had with your brothers, Alfred, the whole gang of them. You guys really had one another's backs. I mean, that in itself was a really touching story.
Yeah, those were my big brothers, Alfred and Peter. Alfred led me into a lot of scrapes. You know?
Yes, I know. But you got out of them.
Yes, we got out of them. But we had a fun time, you know, growing up in Ghana. I mean, it was lovely. I mean, even though times were hard and, you know, things were not always the best, you know, we made the best of it, and thank God we turned out right.
So you're working on book number 2, but you're not going to tell us what it's about. Are you?
Well, I'm exploring some themes, you know, and the theme of healing and forgiveness, especially in situations where unspeakable horrors happen. I work in the castle in Osu. And I have a beautiful view from my office window. It looks at the Atlantic Ocean. But what I see is not the beauty of the sea. I see the thousands and millions of slaves
slave trade
who were taken across the Atlantic Ocean. I visited Mandela's cell in Robben Island, and yet Mandela is the first person who is willing to forgive and forget. I mean, what is it that makes people able to do that?
Well, we've run out of time. It has been such an interesting discussion, and I want to thank you. We've been talking with the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, which is located in West Africa. He has this new book out called My First Coup d'etat. His name is John Mahama. We want to thank him so much for joining us on Straight Talk. It's really a good read. Check it out. We will see you next week with yet another exciting show. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lloyd. Hope to see you in Ghana soon.
I'll be there soon.
Thank you.
Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.
Thank you so much for joining us on Straight Talk. How are you?